So
Yep.
today I'm talking to Whitney Johnson, and I'm really happy that she's my guest. She's written a number of books, and I've read the latest one, Build an A-Team, which I love. But also she has a podcast, and I've listened to a number of episodes of those, and I love her interviewing the guests. Is really good at that. And of course, she has a business. She's a business owner. So there's a lot of reasons why this is a good chance for us to talk. So welcome, Whitney. Sorry.
Thank you, Erno. Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah. This is kind of a bit stupid because we just did this section, but I forgot to push the record button. I'm going to do this again. You graduated magna cum laude in music. That was the thing that really popped for me in your LinkedIn profile. And I was asking, so why music?
Yeah, I know it is kind of odd, right? You're like, wait a second, like, here's what you do for a living and you graduated in music. Well, I grew up in San Jose, California, what is now Silicon Valley, and had a very, in many ways, from a United States perspective, a very typical middle-class childhood where I did things like I learned how to sew, and I played dodgeball, and I played piano, and, you know, I eventually became a cheerleader, sort of all these things that you would expect a girl to do in the 60s and 70s. And it turns out that I had a decent amount of talent on piano. And so as I, went through high school and it was time to go to college, what was I going to major in? I was going to major in music. And I think, again, from a standpoint of being a female in the 60s and 70s, I didn't have a big plan. It's, I wasn't going to be an astronaut. I had this vague notion that I would grow up and get married and have a family. Didn't really have a plan. So in some ways, college wasn't about getting a job. Like I literally don't remember thinking, oh, I've got to get a job after college. It was more about finishing school, which I know sounds so odd and so antiquated, but that's kind of how I was thinking. And so I studied music in college. I played piano and graduated in music. And we can talk a little bit more about what happened after that. But that's really how I ended up studying music in college, is because I didn't have a grand plan. And by the way, I didn't graduate till I was 27 years old either. So there are a lot of stories there.
But I think it is the idea of just focusing on finishing school. That was just typical for that time. So it's so different now, and and especially what you do now. It's so weird that you were thinking that way at that time. And you were in a band. So jazz was your kind of music?
Yeah. So it's interesting. So I was trained classically. But then when I was 17, I had a boy that I dated, and he loved jazz. Like he, gave me this album of Keith Jarrett at, playing in Cologne, Germany. And I was just like, wow, this is awesome. And so kind of just opened up this whole world to me of Keith Jarrett and Chick Corea, and just really fascinated by that. And so when I got to college, I was still doing classical piano and, doing my recitals and taking music theory, but then I started studying jazz piano as well. And I eventually did play in the jazz band at our university. We got to perform at the Montreux Jazz Festival. And I know you're probably thinking, oh, she's really good. I wasn't really good. I was good enough, but I loved it. And I loved the idea of, maybe because I was a girl, maybe because I'm the oldest child in my family, very religiously devout as well, classically trained, all these things. I love this idea of jazz allowed you to move beyond the strictures of where you were and this improvisational element. And it was just so magical to me. And so I wanted to study it and learn more about it.
Right. There's two directions I want to go, and so I'll just pick up one first. Do you still use this idea of going outside the structures today?
No. Yeah. So the answer is yes and no. I think in some ways this notion of going outside of structures, in some ways it's a lifelong quest for me. How do I do that? How do I know what the rules are and be very clear on what the rules are, but then move beyond those rules? one of the things I have found, and so I do a lot of speaking in my business, and when I am preparing to do a speech, and I think this is actually a great way to think about this. So when I'm preparing to do a speech, I don't just have an outline. I have every slide exactly how I want it. I have everything that I want to say fully scripted out, and I memorize it and I memorize it and I memorize it. So that's the classical training. But I also now understand that if I do all of that and I know it so well, so cold that it's just a part in my brain, then when I get into a situation and I'm on stage and something happens that's unexpected, I have the freedom to now improvise, to make jokes, to do fun, unexpected things. But it's only that ability to improvise is now only on the other side of the classical training, if you will, of just knowing my material so well that I can then just relax and see what happens as we go.
Yeah, but I think the jazz, I'm not a trained musician, but jazz music is similar, right? So you really, really have to know how to play the music well. Then you're able to improv.
Exactly. It's very rule bound, but then there's this opportunity to just say, what are we going to do now? Because I don't have to play it the same way every time.
Yeah. Okay. So the other direction I was going, maybe for what means magna cum laude? What do you need to do? Because you said I was not very good, but apparently you are pretty good at something.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So magna cum laude in the United States anyway is basically just where you are in your class. So like summa cum laude, I think is top 1% in your class from a grade point average, and then magna cum laude I think is top 5%. So I was in the top 5% of my graduating class. When I said not very good, I mean from a jazz perspective. I was pretty good at comping and playing behind a soloist, but I never, at least at this point in my life, someday I'm going to be good at this. I wasn't good at that improvisation on my right hand, but that's something that I'm now thinking about in the time that I have now that we are spending more time at home and I'm doing a lot less traveling, at least temporarily, having time to play the piano and figure out how to improvise a bit.
Yeah, that's really smart. Okay, the other part that was really interesting, you all studied English.
Yes, I minored in English.
Right, so, but you, like you said, you were at school from for 8 years, 8 or 9 years, right?
Yes.
I'm not going to say the years. Okay. 8 or 9 years. Is that because you started English after music?
No. This is so everybody who is listening who thinks, oh, my life is over, I am a case study in your life is not over. So here's what happened. I get to college. So I'm a freshman in college. I go for a year. I'm going to do music, I think, but I don't know. I'm pretty sure I'm going to do music, but then I'm like, I don't want to do music. But then I go for 3 semesters. My mom was going to pay for college. She runs out of money. My parents had just gotten a divorce. So now I have to go home and work for a year to earn money so that I can pay for college. So then I go back to college for 6 months, and then I decide that I want to go on a mission for my church. So I leave college for 2 years. I go live in Uruguay, learn Spanish. I'm a missionary for 2 years. Then I come back to college, and now I'm like, well, do I want to do music? Do I want to do English? Do I want to do family study? And oh, by the way, I was at a school, I went to Brigham Young University, where the tuition was really low. So the combination of me getting a scholarship, having low tuition, and working part-time meant that I was having no debt. Like I was just paying as I was going. I'm like, college is really fun. I think I'm going to be on the ballroom dance team. So are you ready for this? I graduate after 9 years, but I'm not in school the whole time. So it's 6 years of school with 180 credits. You only need 120 to graduate. I had 180 credits and still no real idea of what I wanted to be when I grew up. So everybody who's listening, who's like, I don't know, I'm not directed, I don't know what's going to happen, I am an example that you can eventually figure it out.
Right. And just to be clear, credits is what you get for extra stuff that you do.
No, so basically a major, in order to graduate in the United States, you typically have to have 120 credits, and you're going to have 40 or 50 or 60, whatever credits in your major, and then you can have a minor, but you've got to have, at least 100 credits to graduate. Right. And so what I'm saying is I only needed 120 credits to graduate, and I had 180 because I was taking lots of other classes that were not relevant to my major, hence the need to be in school so long.
Okay, so that's an interesting point then. So you have a lot of experience and also a lot of different types of theory that you have in this period. How does this benefit you today?
Yeah. So, okay. I think it's a great question. So number one, it benefits me with this idea of, I think so often people graduate and they get to be, they're 21 or 22 and they say, I don't know what I want to do. And so I'm like, but you will eventually figure it out, because I figured it out. So number one. Number two, that experience that I had when I had to go home and work, I came back, I earned all this money, and I was able to finish school. And so that gave me the confidence, like, I can do this. Like, I can earn money and I can support myself through school. I think the third thing that it really benefited, and then living in Uruguay for 2 years, like I was on my own for 2 years. I learned a foreign language, and I mean, fluently. Like, I had 8 months where I was around no English speakers. And so that was also really valuable experience. I mean, we now call it a gap year, but of living in a foreign country, not, talking to my parents twice a year and not going home at all. So I had this experience of being far away from home, of having to adapt to a new country, learn a new language. And oh, by the way, this wasn't, let's play. This was, oh, hold on just a second. We have cats. What are we doing, kitties? Okay. I'm glad that you're recording this because you can edit it.
Yeah, yes.
We're having a cat fight, real time. Okay, I'll back up just 2 seconds. So the other thing I was learning is that is how to get along with people that are from lots of different countries, and how to translate my ideas into a different language. So that was really important. Oh, and then the last thing is that for those 2 years, this wasn't time to play. Like, we worked every single day, really structured environment. And it was all about serving and helping other people feel like they matter, help them feel like God knows who they are. And so at this time of life, I'm 21 years old, where generally it's all about me, 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 me. I had this experience where it needed to be about you, 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 you. And so those are all these experiences that I had. So by the time I graduated from college, like, I didn't need to go experiment some more. Like, I'd had all these experiences and I was ready to go into the workforce. So that's how I think they helped.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. Do you, like I said, we will talk about the book, Build an A-Team. Do you see that this experience also translated in the S-curve that you talk about in your book? That's the basis of your book?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. One of the things that let me explain what the S-curve is briefly so that everybody knows. So one of the things that we have written about in the book Build an A-Team is this idea of an S-curve, that every single one of us is on this S-curve of learning. And this is reimagined from the work that was done by E.M. Rogers in 1962. He popularized this idea of the S-curve, or it's a more academic book called The Diffusion of Innovations, but I reimagined it to say, okay, we use that to help us understand how quickly an innovation will be adopted, but this can also help us understand how we as individuals learn and grow and develop. So whenever you start something brand new, so for example, you start college or you start a new job, you're at the bottom of that S. And what will happen there is that even though growth is potentially exponential, it will feel like it's very slow because you can't see any results. And so that helps you understand, oh, I'm going to feel discouraged because I can't see any results. But then you're going to put in that effort and you're going to accelerate into competence. And with this comes confidence. And you're in this hyper growth phase where you're exhilarated, your neurons are firing. And so this is what we call the sweet spot. So if you think about it from a college perspective, you're a freshman in college, you're on the launch point of that S curve. As a sophomore and a junior in college, you're in the sweet spot where you know enough, but not too much. It's hard, but not too hard. And then you get to the top of that S curve and growth starts to slow again because you're like, I kind of figured this out. I know what I'm doing. I think it's time for me to do something new. And by the way, because we're not learning as much as we're not getting that dopamine hit, we can get kind of bored and think, okay, well, what am I going to do? And so you start slow, and then you go fast, and then you get slow again. And once you get there, that's when it's time for you to disrupt yourself. You've learned, now it's time for you to leap and then repeat. So that's the S curve of learning framework. And you'll find once you have that mental model that it explains college, it explains your jobs, it explains projects, etc. To answer your question, I certainly did not have that idea when I was in college. That idea came about when I was working with Clayton Christensen at Harvard Business School, and we were investing and we were using that S curve for investing. And I had that aha about, I guess, 10 years ago now, maybe a little bit more than 10 years ago, of like, oh, this S curve can help us understand how we learn and grow, and then saw it as an explanatory mechanism for college and first job, etc.
Right. I remember I draw a similar figure, although I didn't really know the S curve, and especially not the way that you describe it, because I changed my jobs when I was younger quite often. So let's say every 2 years or so. And people that worked at the company that often were there for like 10 years, they ask me, so why do you move? Why do you go so quickly? Why do you move so often, and so on? So it's very easy for me. I have this curve, and I drew the curve, and when I'm at this point, just before it goes this way, I want to leave, because that's at this phase I learn the most, and what I can do with all this knowledge that I've got in this phase, I can use it in my next job, and I can move that forward, that knowledge. So I unknowingly draw the S curve a number of times already.
You intuitively drew that out. And that's so fun is that when people hear this, they go, oh yeah, right, I get it. Like, that completely explains the experience that I've had.
Yeah.
It's like Mario Brothers, if you're a gamer at all.
I know Mario Bros, but I don't game. No. When you started to work, because I still I looked at your LinkedIn profile, and I see your first job, and it starts in '96, and there's quite a gap between when you graduate and when you start. But you started in equity.
Oh, I probably just because it didn't make sense to go back that far. So just really quickly, I graduated from college in 1989. And that's when my husband was getting his PhD in New York at Columbia. And so we're like, okay, let's go to New York. By the way, would not have gone to New York. Super scary to me because I grew up on the West Coast. And, but, he's getting his PhD because I got married in college. I know that's weird, but I did because I did. And so we're now in New York, and my husband's in school. We have to put food on the table. So I have to go out and get a job. But again, I'm a music major and I don't know anybody, and I'm not very confident. And oh, by the way, I'm a woman. So my first job is as a secretary working for a stockbroker. And so that's 89. And then, the big epiphany that I had as I'm like sitting working for all these stockbrokers and listening to them try to open accounts and saying stuff like throw down your pom-poms and get in the game. And as I said earlier, I was a cheerleader, so I was a little offended, but then I'm like, oh yeah, I think I need to throw down my pom-poms. And so we're now like 91, 92. I start going to school at night. Accounting, economics, finance. I got to figure this stuff out. And then I had a boss who believed in me and allowed me to jump from the S curve of being a secretary to being an investment banking analyst, which if you're in financial services, you don't know, that doesn't happen. But that was really, that experience right then was really the beginning of me disrupting myself. And obviously I would not have known to call it this then, but that's what it was, is this idea of disrupting.
Exactly. That's what I was reading, because I missed this, and I go like, okay, how did you get from there to there? And this is just completely explaining it. So that's really good to understand. Then you are at some point become a co-founder with Rose Park Advisors.
Yep.
With Clayton Christensen. That's where you first, what I see, is start talking disruptive innovation. So that, and also goes back to disrupt yourself, because when you disrupt as a person, you bring people with the organization and you grow as an organization as well. So that's for me, that's a really interesting part. So what is the most important two things that you learned there?
Yeah, working with Clayton or just around personal disruption?
Well,
Both.
in
Okay.
that area, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So here's what happened. I was still working on Wall Street. This is like 2003 or so. So 17 years ago now. And I'm an equity analyst, and I'm putting buys and sells on stocks in the emerging markets. And I come across this book called The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen. And I'm like, oh, this explains why every single quarter my estimates for wireless companies like America Mobile are too low, and my estimates for wireline companies like Telmex are too high, because America Mobile is disrupting Telmex. And I was like, wow, this book is amazing. And so in 2005, I left Wall Street, and again, now disrupted myself, because I'd had this epiphany, like disruption, it's not just about products. I think kernel of an idea, it might also be about people. I leave Wall Street, I become an entrepreneur for the first time. And then during that period, I connected with Clayton, and eventually then co-founded that investment firm with him and his son, Rose Park Advisors, where we were investing using this framework of disruption.
That's it. Okay, that's interesting. And also, a great thing is you started 40 Women Over 40.
Yes.
To watch. Let's not forget that. You did that for 4 or 5 years. Why were you driven to do this?
Why did we do this? Yeah. So Christina Valletta, the co-founder, and this was her idea, and this is now, 7 or 8 years ago, this idea of, you've got, when you think about from an S-curve perspective, women in particular tend to be kind of, from a career, sort of over the arc of your career, women tend to be slower starters, or kind of at that launch point longer. In part because it takes them longer to get noticed sometimes, and frequently they're also rearing children. Women inside of an organization not only have to network up and sideways, they also have to network down. So there's more people that have to have buy-in to who they are in order to climb that S-curve. And so one of the things that we were discovering is that there were all these lists out there of 40 people under 40 or 30 people under 30. And we're like, but lots of times women aren't really going to gain that momentum, really move into the sweet spot of their career until their 40s or 50s. And so what we wanted to do was to highlight that cohort of women who were now in their 40s, maybe even their 50s, who were starting to gain momentum, but people didn't know who they were. This notion that when you're 40, like I remember when my mother turned 40, we had a party for her of like rest and peace. Like that's how we thought about the world. And like, no. At 40, you're just getting into the sweet spot of your career. And we wanted to call that out and acknowledge women who maybe start being less visible because of how we look, and like, no, you're now moving into that prime time of your ability to contribute, and we wanted to highlight them.
Why did it end? Because it's still an important topic, right?
Yeah, it ended for a couple of reasons. Number one is that we both got busy focusing on other projects that we felt like we felt called to do. And so we allocated our resources there. So that was part of it. But then the other part is that after a few years, as often happens with a good idea, you started to see people come out with lists like 50 over 50 and at large publications, and they were doing it. They were well capitalized. We could have gone out and probably raised money to do it, but we had never really made that effort to do it. And so it was like, it's time. It made sense to do, and then it made sense to stop doing.
Right. Okay, so you are also on, or were and are still on, a number of advisory boards.
Yes.
That's been always a question for me. I don't know how to get on an advisory. How do you do that?
Oh, it's a great question. So when you're on an advisory board, it's not in like an official board where you've got governance responsibility and you've got to, hire and fire the CEO. In an advisory board capacity, it's much more of, you've got a startup, and they need help. Yeah. And so they need lots of kinds of help. And sometimes it might be coaching the CEO. Sometimes it might be that you're great at marketing. Sometimes it might be you're great at raising money. You're great at, go-to-market strategy, whatever it is. And so they'll reach out to 2 or 3 or 4 people and say, I want you to be on my advisory board so that I can come to you and consult with you in exchange for giving you, 20 basis point, or not 20, but probably 50 basis points of equity in the company. And so I think the best way to get on an advisory board for, and probably a lot of your people who are listening who are entrepreneurs who have advisory boards, is to just find problems that people need solved and be available to help them solve them. And they'll say, I really would like you to be more invested in this company. And so I'm going to give you a small slug of equity in exchange for that.
Great. Okay. So, I'm thinking, do I want to go there? No. In 2012, you start your business that you have today, WLJ Advisors. And that's this solo, how do you call this? You are the one owner, right? You are the owner.
Yeah. Solopreneur. Yeah.
Yes. So WJ, that's Whitney Johnson.
Right.
I guess.
Exactly.
And I also saw that you're in the business as well because Miranda Johnson.
Oh, that's my daughter.
See, she does the podcast and social media for you. So that sounds so familiar to me because my son is doing the podcast editing as well. So that's very funny.
Yeah.
What is the most important thing that you do with your business? What is that you feel that's the most important of your company?
That's a great question. Okay, so from a business model perspective, let's maybe walk through that for people that are listening. So we're a consultancy, and we've got intellectual property that we advise organizations and individuals around this S-curve of learning and the frameworks of personal disruption. So that's what we're selling, if you will. From a business model perspective, it changes every year, but let's say in 2019, probably 20% of it was from doing keynote speaking, and then 30% of it was from CEO and executive coaching, and then the other 50% was from consulting. So those are the different aspects of it. And then we also have a podcast, as you mentioned. And then right now I have a whole LinkedIn Live that we're doing 2 days a week on LinkedIn, obviously. But I would say from a podcast perspective, the newsletter that we have, what we do on LinkedIn, those are all top of the funnel activities that allow people to know, and even the books, actually, the books are also top of the funnel activities, although they do more than that, so we can come back to that. But those are all activities that allow people to know what it is that we do, what we care about. The books have that added benefit of helping us codify what we think and requiring us to really do research and have a position, as opposed to just some sort of ideas that we thought about yesterday. Like, we really have to do the work. And you do get some book sales, but unless you're like, New York Times bestseller, you don't make a lot of money off of books. So if you're thinking you're going to get rich by making books, probably want to get a different business model. But those are top of the funnel activities. To answer your question of what's the most important, I guess I would say I don't think of it like that. I think of like, what do I like doing? But let me just know if I think, well, okay. This is a good question. So speaking, is speaking important? Yes, speaking is important. What job do we hire speaking to do? Well, we hire speaking to do a couple of things. Number one is, yes, you get paid to do it, but also we hire it to help people understand these ideas. But as a keynote speaker, and this goes back to the idea of being a musician, if you deliver your speech well, everybody has a moment where they're not only instructed, but they're also inspired. And that's something that you can do in a keynote speech that you can't really do in a workshop, and you can't really do in a one-on-one coaching session. You're having this moment. It's like being at a concert, right? You're having that moment. So that, I think, is really important in inspiring people to want to do things differently, because that's what disruption is you're disrupting who you are to slingshot into who you can be. I think the coaching is important because and is because then you get this opportunity to be one-on-one with someone, to be this trusted advisor, and really get to be on the front row of being there as they are making this decision to change, and to be there to advise them and to and help them and witness this change that's taking place. And that, I think, is important and inspiring and wonderful as well. And then on the consulting piece, which oftentimes includes some combination of coaching, is just more of how do you take these ideas and start to embed them in the fabric of an organization, which is also important because it's the sustaining piece where you go from being inspired, where you get the keynotes, the podcasts, the books, to that one-on-one where people want to make the change. But then there's that infrastructure element that comes with the consulting. So I think they're all important. It's just a matter of the sequence and meeting people where they are. Like, where do they want to start? Is it on that coaching? Is it on the speaking? Is it on reading the book, listening to a podcast? Rarely is it you're going to start on the infrastructure piece, but that's important in order to have that enduring impact that you want inside of your organization.
Yeah, I love the way they explain that the keynote. How do you look at it? Because I would have seen it as a visibility tool, right? So that when you do keynotes, you become visible for your kind of audience, and those people might hire you. But you explain that you create a moment, and you it's an experience. Mm-hmm. And then the link to you being a musician and also like really play for crowds this is so similar. So this is so connected. I love it. And also with the book, like you said, the book is also visibility. People get to know your ideas, but also I love the way that you do. I have never seen it before, that you close each chapter with a summary. That happens more often. But then you end it with, so if you want help on this part, just here's my email address and you can contact with me there. I thought that's really smart. So every time when you are at a difficulty in the book, that this is something that I'm dealing with, you go like, oh, here's my name, just contact me. That was really smart. I have never seen it before.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thanks.
So okay, I want to go to some quotes of your book. First of all, I thought the opening story, that was just it's just amazing, right? So WD-40, the product, I mean, most people have heard of it. If you are, have some technical things in your history, right, then you have worked with the product. And then, so you know the product, but then you learn about the history of this company and about specifically, like you said, the engagement of the employees of the company, and how happy and excited they are about the future of the company. And the learning is probably the biggest source company to grow in this way that they do, and they did, and how large they became just on one product, but the way that they've promoted the secretary to become at this function and go there. And that was the story that drew me really into the book. So that was a really great story.
Oh, thank you.
Now I have to ask a question about that, of course, because I'm just I have no question. I just a story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think just sharing a little bit of, I think what's sort of underscore what you just shared is this idea of, I think so often people think to themselves, okay, well, I need to go work at a really exciting company. Like, I need to go work at Google, which is an exciting company. And I have friends that work there, so I'm not dissing Google, but I think one of the things that we sometimes forget is that there are companies like WD-40 where, it makes a product that really has not changed in 60 years. It originally kept rockets and missiles from rusting, and now its sole function is to, not sole, but its primary function is to keep things from squeaking. So you're like, okay, well, do people even want to work there? Because it's not very exciting. And yet you look at their engagement scores and they're over 90%. And you look at their
extremely high.
Right. They're extremely high. And you look at their market cap, and I haven't looked at it in the last couple of days, but let's say pre-COVID-19, over the last 20 years, their market cap had increased from like $250 million to, $2.5 billion. So we're talking about a 10x increase, which is outperforming the S&P 500. And so it's like, well, what is happening here? When we did our research, we administered our diagnostic, we found out that this is a company, the CEO, Gary Ridge, is, a person who is committed to allowing people to climb that S curve. And when they get to the top of the S curve, they jump to the bottom of a new S curve. So this notion of learning and leaping and repeating and disrupting yourself is it's embedded into the company. And so it's one of those things that you realize, okay, maybe it's not just about the company with a big brand name. Maybe it's about the opportunities that you have when you're inside of that company to learn, to develop, to grow. And when you're able to do that, it kind of doesn't matter what company you're working at, as long as you personally are having that opportunity to really contribute in a way that feels meaningful to you.
Yeah. I think the most important part was the fact that the CEO, the owner, the entrepreneur, started this thinking from the beginning. So he embedded this idea of that you can grow in any type of function that you want from the beginning. And I think it is a really great idea, but it's also a very difficult idea, like you described in the book.
Yeah.
Because most managers, they help you to grow in your function. They hire, first of all, of course, the wrong people, because they hire the people that are already up of their game.
Right.
Because that's the easiest, because you need the right people now. They need to work on this really big problem now. That's because you're hiring for. And then once they are at that top level, and you've groomed them, and they've arrived and they know what they do. It's a very automatic process that you're doing. Now you want to keep them there because that's the way they make you the most profit or money or the most sense or whatever. So you don't want to let them go. But like I did, every time when you have that experience, you just leave the company because you are going to think new.
And that's exactly. And so for people who are, so a couple of things. First of all, so Gary Ridge was not the founding entrepreneur. So I think that's an encouraging thing for all of you who are listening, thinking, well, we didn't start it from the beginning. Well, ideally you will, but that's not necessarily how it was when he got there. So I think that's encouraging to know that even a company that's ongoing, you can make those changes. But the thing that you're highlighting, Erno, is this idea of, when you get people to the top of an S curve, they're a huge flight risk, because they're a huge risk, not just flight risk, because what's going to happen, because they're bored, they're either going to leave or they're going to get complacent. And when you get complacent, then that actually can be very destructive, not only for them, but also for the company, because their morale drops and they start getting distracted and not focusing. So complacent or bored, and then your ability as a company to adapt to growth starts to diminish as well, because you don't have this person fully engaged. So this is where this idea of the innovator's dilemma comes from, is that you're at risk whether you jump or not. So for you, as an entrepreneur, as you think about this, is what I would suggest is you really think about everybody on your team. Where are they on the S curve? If you've got people who are at the top of that S curve and they're starting to feel like, ooh, I want to do something different, be aware that it may not have anything to do with liking your company or liking you. It's just that they're a little bit bored. So how can you re-engage them in a way that pushes them back down into the sweet spot so that they want to continue working for the company?
I have a burning question about this, because and you just pushed it on it again.
Yeah.
You talk about complacent, and I completely understand what you mean, but how do you recognize that?
Oh, in a person, in yourself, or in someone else?
Yourself. You've noticed it because you are doing other stuff. But as a manager or as a business owner, how do you recognize that in your people?
Yeah. So a couple of things. I think a good starting point is just to look at how long they've been in that role doing the same thing. So if you map against the 10,000 hour rule, and a person's only working 40 hours a week, then they're going to hit that place around the 3 to 4 year mark at most. So you think about you're probably putting in a lot of hours. And so just time and role is a good starting point in trying to gauge whether they're there. But another way to gauge it is, are they saying things like, well, that's not how we do it here?
Mhm.
Because when they're saying that's not how we do it here, they're saying status quo. The kind of, other people's ideas, they're not willing to sort of engage with them. And then another thing is that they can say, when they say things like, well, I've paid my dues, that's another person who's at the top of that S curve. They're just getting somewhat complacent. And then also when they start doing things like they just hit the ball back, like they're not, I don't know if you're a tennis player, but they're not like trying to serve that ball and get it over. They're just, someone throws something to them, they hit it back. And so those, and they're not necessarily coming up with new ideas. Hey, what if we tried this? Hey, what if we tried that? Those are all going to be indicators or markers that person is at the top of that S curve, as a way to start saying, I think maybe they're getting bored. I need to find something for them to do, or I'm going to lose them because they'll leave, or I'm going to fire them because they're going to start underperforming.
Do you also, it's because that's what I've noticed at a couple of companies that I work for, is that when people started paying more attention to their hobbies outside their job than their job.
That's a good indicator as well.
That's what I thought, because I when I look back now, I go like, oh, they were doing so many things that was so, they could have been so much valuable to other companies, and they're just doing it in their hobby. It's just a waste of their potential and their knowledge and everything.
Right, because people who love their work is their hobby.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The challenge for them is making sure that they attend to their family and their loved ones, because they just love they're loving their work.
Right. Okay. So now go to the bottom part of the S curve. That's, I think, is what the most difficult part is for when you begin, because then you get all these bumps and difficulties, and you have no idea that you're moving into the right direction. How do you help a person that is at this stage?
Yeah, it's a great question. Can you give me 2 seconds? Because I think we're going to go over, and I need to make sure.
What is your counter? Because if we can, we
it's
just
at 11. So in 5 minutes, I don't think we're going to finish 5 minutes. So
no, but I can finish in 5 minutes.
You think so? Okay.
I'll have to. We'll make it work.
Okay, got it. Okay. Oops, I just lost you. Where'd you go? Okay. So launch point of the S curve. So the thing that you need to know about the launch point is that 2 things. Number one is it might not be the right S curve for you. So that's one of the things you have to figure out. You're going to try a lot of things. And we know from disruption theory that even when you're willing to take on market risk and play where other people aren't playing, your odds of success, they go up from 6% to 36%. You're still sort of 64% chance that this isn't the right S curve for you. And that's what you're trying to sort out at that bottom, is like, is this, actually playing where no one else is playing? Is this playing to my strengths, et cetera? But once you've said, I think this is the right S curve for me, the challenge right at that point is that there's a lot of messiness, and you don't know how all the pieces fit together. And so you've got to be willing to say to yourself, I'm not going to know immediately. I'm not supposed to know immediately. That's part of the beauty of me being here, is I'm going to ask questions like, why are we doing it like this? So what I would say for you and for anybody who's working with you is you need at this point encouragement. This notion of, I put you on this S curve because I think it would be, I think you've got something that will allow you to contribute in a really unique way. You can do it. It's going to be hard, but I think you can figure it out. Also, to give people really tightly scoped assignments. Can you get this done in a day, a week? Super small, discrete projects so that people can get a lot of feedback and figure out what's working and what isn't. Because when you have something to bump up against, you're getting information, you can course correct a lot more quickly. So those would be, number one is give people encouragement. Number two, give them tightly scoped assignments so they can get information and improve faster. And then number three, while they're in that place, be open to and encourage them asking questions like, why do we do it like this? Even though they're going to feel threatening, there's a huge amount of value that can be created when you have people on the launch point, and they're only going to be there for a short time, and then they're going to move into the sweet spot or jump to a new curve. But either way, there's an opportunity there, and you don't want to squander it.
I agree. Okay, so we are a bit on a time constraint here, but is there, like I said, the business owner, they have like a small business, like 5 to 25 people. Is there something specific that they need to do to work with your book or with the S curve?
Oh, with me. Oh, okay. I
No,
thought you
no,
meant
no. With the content of the book, or with this as in specifically.
yeah. Okay, yeah. So what I would do is I would go listen to our podcast episode 80 because that will give you an overview of, disrupt yourself generally. And I think you could also listen to podcast episode 53 that talks about build an A team. That's a great starting point. Of course, I would love for you to buy the book, but this will give you an introduction to these ideas and concepts. And then what I would do is, now that you've got this basic notion of that S curve, is sit down and think about, where are you on your S curve? Where are your people, your team on their S curves? And then if they're on the launch point, think that they need a lot of encouragement and support. If they're on the sweet spot, you need to help them focus because they can get distracted easily because they're really good at everything now. And then at the high end, you want to be thinking, okay, how do I challenge them? So that can mean challenge them so they move back into the sweet spot, or challenge them by having them jump to an entirely new S curve completely. So those are some quick things that you can be thinking about immediately as you wrap up listening to this episode.
Yeah. Where can people view you? What is the best way to contact you?
Oh, the easiest way is just, you can email me at wj@whitneyjohnson, or you can, that's the easiest way. And then you've heard where you can go listen to the podcast, and you can listen to them anywhere.
Okay. I love this talk so much. It was really great to learn more about you and to get some insights of where the whole idea of the S-curve came from and how this all was connected to music and everything that you do. It was just so much fun to learn about all these backgrounds and bits and pieces, what made you where you are now, because that's what I love. I love to learn, how did you get here and why did you do this and why did you decide that? I wish we had more time. It's okay, but this is it for now. And thank you very much, Whitney, and hopefully for next time.
Erno, thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun. Take care.